The town of Black Hollow, a remote, fog-drenched community nestled deep in the forests of Oregon, had always harbored whispers of things lurking beyond the veil of night. Legends spoke of figures moving between the trees, of shadows stretching too long under the crimson glow of the moon. Most dismissed them as old wives' tales, until the disappearances began. It started with a drifter. A man passing through town, seen at the Rusty Lantern Bar one evening, then never again. A week later, a high school girl on her way home vanished just 3 blocks from her house. Each time there was no struggle, no sign of forced entry, just the silence of the dark swallowing them whole. The only thing the victims had in common was where they were last seen, near the abandoned Fairchild estate at the edge of the Black Hollow woods. No one dared go near the crumbling mansion. Once the grand estate of the enigmatic Lazarus Fairchild, the property had rotted into decay after its owner had disappeared over a century ago. Some claimed he had dabbled in dark rituals. Others whispered he had never left at all, that something unnatural still stirred within those walls. Nathan Carter, an investigative journalist with a penchant for the macabre, arrived in Black Hollow late one stormy night, eager to uncover the truth behind the recent string of vanishings. He had chased plenty of urban legends before. Most were nothing but hoaxes, campfire stories meant to frighten children. But something about this case was different. The fear in the townspeople's eyes was real. They weren't just frightened. They were hunted. The air was thick with moisture as he stepped out of his car, the headlights barely piercing the dense fog creeping across the deserted streets. A single street lamp flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The town felt off, as if the darkness itself was watching him. His first stop was the Black Hollow Sheriff's office. Sheriff Elias Moore, a grizzled man with tired eyes and a cigarette perpetually hanging from his lips, barely looked up from his desk as Nathan entered. "You're the reporter, aren't you?" the sheriff muttered, exhaling a slow cloud of smoke. "You should turn around and head right back to wherever you came from." Nathan raised an eyebrow. Not a very warm welcome. "I'm here to help." "Help?" The sheriff let out a dry chuckle. "Boy, you don't know what you're dealing with. These ain't just missing persons cases. People vanish without a trace, no signs of struggle, no bodies. And those who do come back." He hesitated, his expression darkening. "They ain't the same." Nathan leaned in. "You mean someone returned?" The sheriff didn't respond at first. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he reached into his drawer, pulling out a file and tossing it across the desk. Inside were grainy black and white photos of a young woman, pale as death, sitting in a hospital bed. Her eyes, once bright and lively in her earlier photographs, were now hollow voids, sunken and devoid of humanity. Her lips were cracked, blood-stained. And the most disturbing part, her teeth were wrong. Too sharp. Too long. "She was found wandering near the old Fairchild estate," the sheriff muttered. "Barefoot. Her clothes were drenched in blood that wasn't hers. She doesn't speak anymore. Just sits there. Sometimes she screams at night." A chill ran down Nathan's spine. He had expected a ghost story, a fable. But this was something else. Something real. That night, against every warning, Nathan made his way to the Fairchild estate. The skeletal remains of the mansion loomed ahead, framed against the gnarled trees like the ribcage of some ancient beast. The windows, black as pitch, seemed to swallow what little moonlight touched them. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, something like rust, or blood. As he stepped forward, the wind howled through the trees, a whispering voice carried on the air. And then he heard it. A breath. Slow. Shallow. Right behind him. Nathan spun around, but the path behind him was empty. His pulse thundered in his ears as he turned back to the house. The door, which had been closed just moments before, was now slightly ajar. A deep, guttural growl resonated from within the darkness. And then a voice. Low, velvety, dripping with something both alluring and deadly. "I've been expecting you." Nathan Carter's breath hitched in his throat as the voice slithered through the air, wrapping around him like unseen tendrils. His grip tightened on the flashlight, its feeble glow barely slicing through the suffocating darkness inside the Fairchild estate. The door, slightly ajar, seemed to pulse, like a wound slowly reopening. He had a choice, turn back and leave or step inside. But something in him knew, this wasn't a place one simply walked away from. Swallowing hard, he stepped forward. The floor groaned beneath his weight, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The air inside was damp and stale, carrying a metallic tang that clung to his tongue. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by his movements, Yet the sensation of being watched never wavered. The voice had come from somewhere deep within the mansion. Nathan swept his flashlight across the decayed grandeur before him. Tattered drapes swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Portraits lining the walls bore faces blurred with time and rot, their eyes hollowed out, as if something had clawed into the canvas, erasing their gaze. A whisper. Not words, just the rustling of breath. Right by his ear. Nathan spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. The beam of his flashlight flickered. For a moment he thought he saw movement at the top of the grand staircase. Something tall, impossibly thin, limbs too long. But when he blinked it was gone. A slow, deliberate creak echoed from the hallway ahead. Nathan forced himself forward, deeper into the house. The hallway was lined with doors, their wooden surfaces warped with age. One stood slightly ajar at the end, the darkness within thick, suffocating. A low, wet sound came from inside. A shuffle. A whisper of fabric. And then, a breath. His flashlight wavered as he reached the doorway. Something smelled wrong. Not just rot, but something sweeter, more cloying. Capri. Blood. Steeling himself, he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was vast but empty, save for a single chair positioned in the center. Seated in it was a figure. A man. No. A husk of a man. The skin was paper-thin, stretched too tightly over bone, as if it had shriveled away from within. Lips cracked, dried blood caked at the corners of his mouth. But the worst were the eyes. Or rather, where the eyes should have been. Empty sockets, black and yawning as if something had hollowed them out. Yet the figure smiled. Nathan took a step back, but the floor seemed to stretch beneath him, pulling him in deeper. The thing in the chair tilted its head, the sound of cartilage cracking too loud in the silence. And then it spoke. Welcome home. A cold hand clamped around Nathan's wrist. He jerked back violently, breaking free, but the moment his skin was released, something else happened. The walls breathed. Shadows rippled outward, distorting, twisting into shapes that weren't human. Fingers stretched from the darkness, curling along the edges of the room. The floorboards groaned, splintering as if something beneath were clawing its way upward. Nathan staggered out of the room, gasping. His mind screamed at him to run, but the hallway had changed. The doors had vanished. The path behind him was nothing but a void, an expanse of absolute darkness that seemed to move. A whisper slithered through the air, familiar, taunting. I've been expecting you. And then, at the far end of the corridor, something stepped forward. Lazarus Fairchild. Or what had once been him. Dressed in a suit that seemed woven from shadows, his face was sharp, elongated, his smile too wide. The air around him bent, as though the house itself recoiled from his presence. His eyes, black voids like the girls in the sheriff's photos, devoured the light. He raised a hand in a gesture of invitation. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. You wanted the truth, Lazarus murmured, his voice silk in venom. Step forward. The shadows behind Nathan lurched. And the door at the end of the hall, one that hadn't been there before, swung open. Nathan had no choice. He ran. Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted toward the open doorway, his feet barely finding traction on the shifting floorboards. The shadows behind him seethed, writhing like living tendrils, reaching, grasping. A sound, low, guttural, hungry, resonated through the house. Not just from behind him. From beneath. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a terrifying second there was nothing. No sound. No breath. Just void. Then a flicker. A single candle sputtered to life, casting an anemic glow across the room. Nathan's eyes adjusted, his pulse still hammering. The space around him was no longer part of the mansion. It was something else. Stone walls, damp and pulsating as though alive, stretched outward in impossible directions. The architecture defied logic. Staircases led to nowhere, doorways opened into voids of blackness. The air smelled of decay and something deeper, something ancient. A slow, rhythmic sound filled the space. A heartbeat. Not his own. Nathan turned. Lazarus was there. Closer now, impossibly close. His grin never wavered, his hands clasped behind his back like a patient host awaiting a guest's first reaction. Welcome to the Hollow, Lazarus murmured. Your journey begins. Nathan staggered backward, but the wall behind him moved, pulsing like flesh, pushing him forward. Lazarus extended a hand, fingers too long, too slender. You wanted answers. His voice was silk wrapped around a blade. Let me show you. Nathan's mind screamed, but his body betrayed him. His hand lifted, his fingers inches from Lazarus's own. And then the floor collapsed. Nathan plummeted into the abyss, the walls stretching, elongating into a spiraling vortex of screaming faces. Hands clawed at him from the void, whispers turned to shrieks. He could feel the house's hunger, its need. And at the very bottom, waiting for him, was something far worse than Lazarus Fairchild. Something that had been waiting for centuries. Nathan's body slammed against the cold, pulsating ground with bone-jarring force. He gasped, his breath knocked from his lungs as darkness curled around him like a living thing. The walls, if they could even be called that, shifted and writhed, slick with a wetness that reeked of rot and something far older, far fouler. He was no longer in the Fairchild estate. The cavern stretched infinitely, its grotesque architecture carved from flesh-like stone, veins of black ichor running through its surface. The air was thick with whispers, the voices of the long-forgotten murmuring just beneath the threshold of understanding. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped in slow, deliberate intervals, the only real sound in the suffocating silence. Nathan staggered to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. The wound on his wrist, where the cold hand had grasped him, throbbed with unnatural heat, veins darkening beneath his skin. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus. He needed to find a way out. If there even was one. A voice, soft, laced with amusement, broke the silence. "You fall so easily." Nathan turned sharply, his heart slamming against his ribs. Lazarus Fairchild stood mere feet away, his form shifting at the edges, as though the darkness refused to fully release him. His smile stretched too wide, his teeth glistening like polished ivory. "Where am I?" Nathan forced the words out, though his throat felt raw as if he had been screaming for hours. Lazarus tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "You are home." Nathan's fingers curled into fists. "This isn't real." A low chuckle slithered through the air. "Reality is relative. But make no mistake, you are very much here. And you are not alone." Nathan's pulse quickened. He turned, scanning the darkness, and his stomach lurched. The walls were moving. Figures pressed against them, their outlines barely human. Hollow eyes stared from within the flesh-like stone, mouths gaping in silent agony. Fingers twitched, reaching, stretching toward him but unable to break free. Their bodies were fused to the walls, prisoners of something far greater than themselves. Nathan stumbled back, horror coiling in his gut. "What is this place?" Lazarus took a slow step forward. "A threshold. A womb. A tomb." He gestured toward the endless dark. "This is where the hollow breathes. And soon it will hunger." Nathan's breath came in shallow gasps. He needed to move. To run. But where? Every path led deeper into the abyss, into the unknown. And Lazarus, he was merely toying with him. A distant sound, a scraping, a skittering, echoed through the cavern. Lazarus's grin widened. "Ah, they've noticed you." The sound grew louder. Closer. Multiple things moving in tandem, their movements erratic, jagged, like the spasms of something not entirely in control of its own body. Nathan turned toward the sound and his blood ran cold. They emerged from the darkness in a grotesque crawl, limbs bent at unnatural angles, their movements a horrible blend of human and insectoid. Their faces wrong, skin stretched too tight, mouths frozen in twisted expressions of agony. But their eyes were the worst. Hollow. Endless. Hungry. Nathan's legs finally obeyed. He ran. The ground shifted beneath him, pulsing like something alive. The creatures shrieked, a sound that splintered his mind, filling every crevice with cold, consuming terror. He stumbled but pushed forward, his breath ragged, his body screaming for escape. A door, impossible in this place, stood ahead, slightly ajar, its frame carved with symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. It was his only chance. Behind him the creatures closed in. Lazarus's voice echoed through the void. "Choose wisely, Nathan Carter. Some doors lead deeper. And some never truly open again." Nathan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, gripping the doorframe as cold fingers brushed the back of his neck. And then, darkness swallowed him whole. Nathan tumbled through the abyss, his screams lost to the howling void around him. The walls, if they could even be called that, pulsed like a living entity, faces pressing outward from the shifting mass, distorted, hollow-eyed, their mouths stretched in silent agony. Hands clawed at him as he plummeted, skeletal fingers raking across his skin, cold and unrelenting. Then, impact. Nathan slammed onto a hard surface, the breath torn from his lungs. Darkness swallowed him whole, thick and impenetrable, until suddenly torches ignited along the walls with an eerie, greenish glow. He was in a chamber. A vast, circular expanse carved from black stone, the walls inscribed with writhing symbols that seemed to shift under his gaze. The floor beneath him pulsed, veins of crimson light snaking through the cracks, as though the very ground carried a heartbeat. And at the center stood it. Lazarus Fairchild no longer wore the pretense of humanity. His form was elongated, his limbs grotesquely stretched, his grin too wide, revealing rows of jagged, glistening teeth. His eyes, if they could even be called that, were bottomless voids swirling with something ancient, something hungry. "You are where you were always meant to be," Lazarus intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The Hollow called you Nathan Carter. You followed its whispers. Now, you belong to it." Nathan struggled to his feet, his head spinning. What the hell is this place?" he gasped. Lazarus stepped forward, his shadow stretching unnaturally. "A wound," he said softly. "A tear between worlds. A place older than your kind can comprehend. A place that feeds. And now it will feast upon you." Nathan's heartbeat thundered in his chest. The air was thick, suffocating. He backed away, but the chamber walls moved, shifting, closing in like the gaping maw of a beast. The torches flickered wildly, casting monstrous, twisting shadows that loomed, reaching for him. Then the whispers returned. Not from Lazarus. From everywhere. Thousands of voices, overlapping, writhing in his skull. Some pleading. Some laughing. Some screaming in an agony so profound it threatened to shatter his mind. "You were warned. You should have left. You will never leave now." Nathan clenched his head, his knees buckling. He forced himself to move, his eyes darting around for an escape. There was none. The symbols on the walls burned brighter, pulsing with a sickening life. The ground trembled beneath him. The very air seemed to be devouring him, pulling at his flesh, at his soul. Lazarus lifted his hands. The chamber shuddered. "Now," he whispered, "become part of the Hollow." The walls ruptured. A mass of writhing, starving tendrils exploded outward, black as the void, slick with something viscous and alive. They surged toward Nathan, twisting, clawing, consuming. Nathan ran. He didn't know where, there was nowhere, but he ran. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but the tendrils followed. The ground fractured, opening into a spiraling pit of endless, writhing darkness. And at its core, a mouth, vast, unfathomable, lined with countless teeth, dripping with black ichor, stretching wide to welcome him. A final, wretched laugh erupted from Lazarus. Nathan leapt. Not into the mouth. Not toward the abyss. Toward the only thing he could see, the flickering torchlight of a passage to his left. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world convulsed. A scream, not his, not human, shattered through the air. And then, silence. Nathan's eyes fluttered open to a gray sky. Cold rain pattered against his skin. He was lying on the ground just outside the Fairchild estate. The house was gone. Not burned, not in ruins, gone. As though it had never been there at all. His body ached. His mind, fractured, haunted, screamed at him to move, to leave, to never return. Struggling to his feet, he turned toward Black Hollow. The town was silent, the fog curling through the streets like ghostly fingers. Somewhere in the distance he thought he heard a whisper. Or maybe it was just the wind. Nathan never wrote about Black Hollow. Never spoke of what happened. But every night as he lay in bed he saw them, the eyes, watching from the darkness. And he knew. The Hollow was still there. Waiting. This story is a work of fiction, a creation of pure imagination. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.